It looks like the Democrats might be worried. This thing that's going on in Texas about the redistricting is having like consequences far beyond Texas. So it's opening up the conversation about redistricting, and it looks like it's about to go nuclear.
Those that have fled to Illinois or to California, be reminded that the FBI's assistant has reportedly been enlisted, and their powers are not confined to any singular state's boundaries.
The gerrymander wars are heating up big time. There was no quorum in the Texas State House today to get those 5 new Republican seats. That's because the 50 Texas state Democrats were a no-show, blowing off the deadline to come back in the face of some pretty serious consequences, $500 a day fines.
One of the things that is going to come out in this video is just some data, some different viewpoints as far as is it right, is it wrong, are the Republicans making a good move? But Greg is going to make a great point about the fact that this whole thing of gerrymandering, some people were familiar with it, some people weren't, but it's now a conversation that people are Googling because people want to understand what it is.
No more direct deposits and the threat of arrest, with the FBI apparently now on their tails. California Governor Gavin Newsom is about to hold a news conference with some of the Texas holdouts, following the lead of other blue enclaves, Illinois and New York, even though critics point out those states have way worse gerrymandered maps. However, New York Governor Kathy Hochul still insisting Democrats are the ones who play by the rules.
I've never been a hand-wringer on the sidelines. I'm a street fighter from Buffalo, and my blood is boiling over this. And so is the other governors, the other Democratic governors. If we allow the Republicans to get away with what they're attempting to do, this legal insurrection of our...
Now, she said this legal insurrection. So this is another one of those situations where the courts are being tested and precedent is being tested, but it's all within a legal framework. And the other point about this is, if you notice, the states that people are fleeing to, the Texans are fleeing to, are states where the governors are potentially running for president. So they're seeing this as an opportunity to get their name out there on the national stage, that people are more familiar with their names. Because one of the big things about running for president or any national office is name recognition. So they're trying to get their names out there. Gavin Newsom has a head start, obviously, because he's the governor of California, and governors of California tend to do well in presidential elections.
Our U.S. Capitol, then we'll have a generation of redistricted, gerrymandered seats that are skewed against Democrats. And when will we ever get the balance of power, at least in one?
And that's the issue, that they're skewed against Democrats. So we'd be having the same conversation on the right if something was being done to skew it against Republicans. So whilst I don't agree with the point or what they're saying, well, I do agree with the point of what they're saying. I just don't agree with what they're saying. Their point is they're going to lose power. And if the shoe was on the other foot, we'd be having this conversation about losing power, and we'd be challenging what the Democrats are doing.
Washington.
But the Democrats are about to bring some nukes to this street fight. One of the Texas runaways, State Representative Jean Wu, is likening the situation to a Cold War.
This is very dangerous. That everything we're doing right now smacks of the Cold War. And what we're talking about is launching nukes at each other. And ultimately, it will be the American people who are hurt. Democrats have no choice but to respond to this in the same way. If you launch missiles at us, we have to launch missiles at you, and it will never end.
5 new ruby red Republican seats would surely sweeten the pot for President Trump, who has now reached 200 days in office. But critics like Stacey Abrams, not fans.
Why are we still listening to Stacey Abrams? What has she done other than rake in tons of money, allegedly billions of dollars, through backhanded deals, through this whole USAID and just the connections that she has, and not win the gubernatorial race? Like, that's what she's done. I'm not saying in her personal life. I believe she's an attorney. She's a blah, 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 blah. But on the political stage, she's been a professional whiner. She's made a name for herself just criticizing Trump, as many people have. Why are we going to Stacey Abrams? What has she done that demonstrates excellence in a political prowess or in an ability to win races?
Among the many other vile things that Donald Trump has been called, including tyrant, liar, scam artist, he is also an aspiring dictator, supported and guided like a puppet by a cabal of tech billionaires, Christian nationalists, and xenophobes.
All of these words, regular people like us have no idea what she's talking about. So I'm not talking people down. I'm not saying we don't have a good vocabulary. I'm just saying all these words, these are words that have been tested in focus groups amongst people that aren't regular people. This is why the Democrats keep getting it wrong. So she's gone out there. She said all of these things that most regular people, we don't talk like that. And this whole thing about the dictator, I've said this so many times in my videos, but the idea of someone in their late 70s/80s, being Trump, deciding very late in his life when he's already a billionaire that he wants to be a dictator, it just goes against human nature. It really does. Like, he's at an age where his energy levels are dropping. Any dictator that you can read about throughout history started that regime, or started that journey much earlier in their life. They may have died in office or may have died as dictators in later in life because they just held on to power for so long. But as far as starting to be a dictator, and people aren't buying it anymore, because as Donald Trump said it, and this is one of his classic lines, when they were like, they had that No King's Day, and he was like, this whole thing about me being a dictator or a king, if I was, or if I were a dictator or a king, I wouldn't have all these problems. I wouldn't be worrying about what the Supreme Court says. I'm paraphrasing what he said. But his point was, clearly he's not a dictator, because conversations are being had about the legal challenges that he's putting forth. Dictators don't do that. They just do what they do, and they get rid of people that oppose them. So, Stacey, please, just let's have a conversation where we're talking about policies. You're looking at the policies that are working, and you're giving credit for those. The ones that need to be tweaked, say they need to be tweaked. But this constant line of attack of the sexist, racist, homophobic, if you notice, that's the trinity that is always used against people that they're trying to undermine: sexist, racist, homophobic. And it's usually leveled against white males, because there's no way of coming back from that. There's no way of disproving that you're a racist.
Who all have his ear and understand government a lot better than he does.
Jesse, I'm going to start with you. Those are some pretty big accusations, but I didn't hear those words used when Democrats were gerrymandering their states.
No, of course not. I love that Republicans finally are playing hardball with direct deposit, because now they're stranded without money. And so how are they going to get money? They're going to have to panhandle in Chicago. You could probably make a lot of money doing that. When a fighter is out on his feet, Harold knows, you knock his ass out. This party is delirious, and the Republican Party has to take full advantage at this point.
I'm not going to interrupt again, but what he's saying is exactly what the Democrats were probably thinking after Trump lost the previous election. They were like, the Republicans are on the back foot. Let's put them out. Let's put their leader out. Let's put their prize fighter out. So let's do all the stuff. And that's what they did. And it backfired like ridiculously. So we need to proceed. When I say we, I'm saying the conservative side. I'm not a Republican. But the conservative side needs to proceed with caution, with strategy, and understanding that in the world of politics, things can change really quickly. And once you open the Pandora's box, it's open. And it just becomes, like that guy was saying, you launch missiles at us, we launch missiles at you.
We have to kick the illegals out of the country. We have to kick them out of the census, and we have to gerrymander to the tilt. Why? Because the Democratic Party cannot be trusted to be the opposition party anymore. They have to have a permanent minority. It used to be like, you know what? They wanted to raise taxes. We wanted to cut them. We were isolationists. They were a little bit out there. It's not like that anymore. This party's dangerous. They're cutting kids' things off, okay? They're doing crazy stuff at the border. We can't have them.
This conversation could be from a far left-leaning webcast or podcast or channel saying the exact same thing about the Republicans. So remember, let's try to apply principles that are consistent, that will allow us to get good outcomes every time. If saying the other party is dangerous and they need to be done away with is not acceptable when Democrats say it, it's certainly not acceptable when Republicans say it, even if it does align with your values. We need to come up with a better way of doing this.
Be a normal party. We have to put them out of their misery. Right now, they're using the N-word, nuclear. And that usually, typically, in nation-state battles, when someone's survival is at stake, you use nukes if your back's up against the wall. And it's existential for the Democratic Party. If you think about it, if we gerrymander and they gerrymander, we have 20-seat advantage. All right. We have a Supreme Court 6-3 majority. And just the way the geography is in the Senate, you're always going to have more advantages for Republicans that way. If you can lock this in with what they're trying to do, the Democratic Party is screwed. And that's what we've been trying to accomplish for the last 3 decades. That's what they've been trying to do to us with triggering an invasion, with trying to kill the president, with trying to censor us and debank us. It's only fair that we fight fire with fire. So if there's mutually assured destruction, they don't have the fissile material to go toe-to-toe with us. We're going to survive. They're not. So I say bring it on.
Well, and it sounds like, Kennedy, that's what you're going to get. You've got these states threatening to do the same thing. New York is one of them. But the fact is, a lot of these blue states are already so gerrymandered. There's not a lot of, left to squeeze.
I think that I agree with what Kennedy's about to say. I'm not a fan of it on either side. So we have to think this through. But let's see what Kennedy actually has to say.
That's where the desperation comes from, because they started this process. And, as an independent voter, I don't like it. I don't like it in Texas. I absolutely hate it in California. California is essentially a monarchy. It is a one-party state, and they've gerrymandered themselves into a corner. They really don't have anywhere else to go. And, I'm surprised that there's any room left in Illinois, because J.B. Pritzker takes up so much of the oxygen with his big personality. And he's laughably hypocritical when he is trying to shield these poor Texas Democrats when his state is gerrymandered to the point where 44% of Michiganders voted for President Trump, yet they only have a 14-3 representation.
But he's running for president. And I'll be honest, I'd never really heard of J.D. Pritzker until this whole event came about. He was one of those people that was tipped to run for president when Biden was dropping out. But I think this is the part of his presidential run. I think this will backfire because I'm not sure that these Texas Democrats are going to get the outcome that they want. And then this will be tied to him.
Democrats to Republicans in Congress. And there's something about that it doesn't pass the sniff test, but it's also mathematically dishonest. So, and these people who are up in arms about that, they started the arms race. I never liked it. And then Democrats tried to take the high road in Congress, trying to pass legislation that made it through the House, failed in the Senate, that would end the gerrymandering. And the reason they did that is because they had already blown all their powder. There are no more states where they can push Republicans up against the wall. And I guess the only thing we can do is get rid of the two-party system and invite more parties to come in, because right now it is so factionalized. It is absolutely paralyzed.
It does feel like the states are going to.
I do think we need more than a two-party system. I think the problem with that is, in order for that to work, you need an electorate that is more involved. You need more people to be engaged, to understand the policies. In the UK, they have a parliamentary system where you can have a party in power, and if they don't get enough votes, they may have to form an alliance with another party. That's happened in the UK over the past 25 years, maybe, where you've had a party that won, but they didn't win outright. So they have to have what's called a coalition government. Not sure if I'm a fan of that, but I think the two-party system is difficult at the point that we are in history now, because each party is now just trying to get a permanent advantage and testing the law and doing things that I think ultimately can undermine the purpose of the democracy and the purpose of the party. So the idea of having more parties than two that could potentially be viable parties that could win probably needs to be explored.
Deeper red, deeper blue, and that's where we are. And Harold, I know that you're somebody who likes to reach across the aisle on occasion. But as my fellow lawyer on the panel, I got this in my inbox, and it was from the Texas Attorney General, and it said, "I'm suing Robert Francis O'Rourke," and it took me a second to remember that's Beto. So he is using the name, but now we have Democrats saying like they're legal insurrection. They're using the courts. They use the courts every day. Isn't that what we're supposed to do?
Good to be back around the table with everybody. So I don't have any issue with every 10 years, once a census comes in any state, you recognize the political configuration and constitution of the partisan makeup of the House and the Senate and whomever the governor may be. And when I was in Congress, there was always an effort to try to really go all out at the beginning of every decade, because that's when the census numbers would come in, and that's when.
All right, but with that is contingent upon the census being done fairly and correctly. Allegedly, this previous census was done in a way that it counted illegal immigrants, which you could argue isn't fair and isn't equitable, because if they're not legal residents, then should they be counted? So you can make this argument that it should be done every 10 years, and maybe that's a good idea, or I don't know, but we then have to define what the census should be doing and how it should be done, and having a bipartisan agreement on that. Then the conversation about saying, well, let's just do the redistricting every 10 years would make sense. But if the party in power rigs it in a way that when the redistricting is done, that they get an unfair advantage, then you have to question the census, which is what's happening right now.
When the legislatures would redraw these districts. So gerrymandering in and of itself, as much I agree with Kennedy, I don't like it, but it's legal. The only thing you cannot do when you gerrymander is take race into account. And if you do, the Supreme Court, all liberal appointees, conservative appointees, it's stated in pretty good law. We've seen laws upturn over the last 3 or 4 years, but this is pretty good law. You can't use race as a consideration. The issue here, and where I differ with my pal Jesse here, is this is midstream. They've called a special session in Texas. I tried to say a few days ago on the show, I just think it's wrong. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do it. We have a set of rules that we've all lived by, which is 10 years. And Jesse, you can make the point, and Kennedy, and I think Shannon as well, about California not having much room, Illinois. I don't like the way some of those states have done, but at least in fairness to New York and California, they have independent commissions that actually go about doing this. But they sometimes get the gerrymandering thing.
But the question is, how independent? Just labeling something an independent commission doesn't mean that it's actually going to be independent. The Fed is supposed to be independent of politics, but it's not, clearly. The SCOTUS, the Supreme Court, is supposed to be apolitical, but each president that places a Supreme Court justice is going to place someone that aligns with their political view or their interpretation of the Constitution. So that's where we're human beings, and human beings are going to have worldviews, and that is always going to inform the things that they do. Some people are better than others at, managing that. But some people are just like Ketanji. She's blatant. Like pretty much anything that Trump sends up there, she's going to fight against, even if she's the only one. And that has happened recently where, she's written a dissent and people have absolutely annihilated. Even Sotomayor has come out and said, you got this one wrong.
Wrong as well. If we allow this to happen, and we should be clear, this is happening because President Trump has urged him to do it. Now, I don't think if you're the president and you have midterms coming next year, that this is a real projection and declaration of strength and confidence if you need to have Texas try to find you 5 more seats. I'm not one that's for tit for tat, but I got to tell you, if Texas does this, California, New York, and Illinois, it's hard for me to say don't do it for the simple reason that I just think it's unfair what they're doing. If we were at the beginning of the decade and Texas said, we're going to redraw these districts, we have the power, I'd say, you know what? They're right. This is how the process works. But to do it midstream, I don't think this is a Cold War. The young man obviously didn't know what the Cold War was about. This is a political fight that will have repercussions for a very long time, because anytime a party in the middle of a decade gets a little more power and is able to call a special session and redraw districts, they'll do it. And I just don't think that's good for the overall body politic.
Well, and Greg, there are Republicans who are worried about this too. They're in swing districts and they worry if the blue gets bluer, it's going to, like in New York, they're going to lose a seat.
I say just go all out to the very end. You know what? The thing about Trump, there's no such thing as midstream. Like, he comes in, the beginning, middle, and end is completely thrown out the window. It's like, wait, I'm not going to wait another 5 years.
And Greg is about to make a fantastic point, and I'm going to let him make the point. But the thing that has happened with Trump, I think, in this second term, he realizes it's his last opportunity. He realizes that no matter what he does, there are people that are going to dislike him. I think that's a liberating thing. It feels like he has a good team of people around him who can set good policies. And so far, a lot of them have worked out. There's never going to be a perfect administration. So you're never going to have an administration that gets everything right in everyone's eyes. But what I think he has accomplished up until this point is his base, the people that supported him, they're getting what they voted in, as close to it as you can actually do. This is why the base, the numbers, when they look at the polls, people are backing him. The people that aren't going to back him, no matter what he does, like he said in his State of the Union address, he could cure cancer and they would find something negative to say about it. But Greg, I align with Greg and Kennedy with this one. I think Harold Ford Jr., he's a very moderate type of person, and he does try to find the good and bad in both sides. But I disagree with him on this one.
I'm only going to be president until 2028, maybe. This is what I like about this administration, and also his first one, is he turns the lights on. So we learn stuff that we never really paid attention to before. Like, I knew nothing about gerrymandering. Now I'm sick of hearing about it. But I actually kind of know what it is, and that's great. And that is the beauty. Trump shows us how the Democrats have had a free ride on this grift, because we just didn't pay attention to it. It was like something nerds and wonks are obsessed with. Gerrymandering, it's a stupid word. I hate saying it. But then Trump does it. And it's, oh my God, everybody's screaming. And now we get a master's class on it. Everybody's talking about it. We're learning the ins and outs. But then the curse of that is that for the Dems is that we know they've been doing it all along.
They tell on themselves, because when they were doing it, the media was not making a big deal about it. Now Trump is doing it. The media is making a big deal about it. But we can look back and say, well, look at Illinois. That looks odd. And so we are getting a masterclass on it. And I think it's good, because I think as voters, people need to be more informed and more educated in a more nuanced way.
Knock his ass out. This
themselves into
Robert Frank.
Midstream. I don't think this is a cold.
So we learned stuff that we never really paid attention to before. Like, I knew nothing about gerrymandering. Now I'm sick of hearing about it. But I actually kind of know what it is, and that's great. And that is the beauty. Trump shows us how the Democrats have had a free ride on this grift, because we just didn't pay attention to it. It was like something nerds and wonks are obsessed with. Gerrymandering, it's a stupid word. I hate saying it. But then Trump does it. And it's, oh my God, everybody's screaming. And now we get a master's class on it. Everybody's talking about it. We're learning the ins and outs. But then the curse of that is that for the Dems is that we know they've been doing it all along. Remember, Harold, I don't have to tell you this. The Republican Party was created as a response to the Democrat Party. And all this is, that's all we do, is everything that the Republicans do is a response to something the Democrats done. And I would say that if the Dems could do it, they would do it. And it's good, as Jesse says, that they would. But the beauty of Trump is that they used to make sure we were in the dark on this. And whenever he attacks something, the lights go on. I see a series, Dog the Bounty Hunter, Dems on the run. After all, they hunted Republicans for the longest time. They went after Trump supporters in the military. They went after parents at school boards, members of churches, censored supporters, as Jesse said, jailed people for wandering the Capitol. Maybe it's time that the hunter become the hunted.
Can I
the
share-
world's most dangerous game.
Can I ask you one question?
See, this is the thing. And in closing, that's what I would say is we are now in a situation where everybody feels like they have to use all of the ammunition that they have, because the Democrats tried everything to prevent Trump from getting a second term. It didn't work. They vilified him. They have made him the axis of evil. And that then is how they justify everything else that they do. And people who don't want to have a critical thinking view of this look at it and say, well, you have to do whatever to stop evil, right? So the problem that we have is people aren't looking at the policies, aren't saying compared to what, aren't saying, well, Democrats said that 6 years ago. Why is it a problem now? They're just looking at personalities, and it's dangerous because it then means when Trump comes out of office, if you then have a Democratic administration, they're going to undo everything Trump did. They're going to try to one up, which is what this administration is doing. They're going to try to codify things that it can't be undone, and it's just a slippery slope. What we need to do is make sure that the American people are always at the heart of every single policy, every single action, not just the desire to hold on to power. It has to be, is this best for the American population? Now, nothing will be best for every American. Some things, are going to have upsides and downsides to different people in different economic situations. But ultimately, if you're just opposing a bill because you don't like the other side, that's silly, and it's not productive, and it's not good for the American people. So that's my response. It seems like the Democrats are pulling out all the stops. What's happening in Texas will probably be played out in other states based on and depending on what happens here. Make sure you like, make sure you subscribe. There are people that watch that maybe don't subscribe, but this is a tiny channel. So I really appreciate your subscription. Quite often, sometimes I see that people give comments and they're like, oh, you said this wrong, or you got that fact wrong. I'm fine with that. I'm not a political analyst. I'm just a guy with a Wi-Fi connection and a camera who wants to add my voice to the conversation. So if I get it wrong, hey, call me out. If you know someone that what I say might trigger or might enlighten, because maybe you've been trying to say the exact same thing to them, but they don't listen to you, make sure you share this video. I appreciate you watching. And as I said, make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, and leave your